Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Relationship Series. My name is Gina Spatero, and this is my brother Sam Spatero. And tonight's topic is guilt trips. And I think that we can all relate to this one at some point or in a time or another in our lives where, we've been guilted into doing something that we obviously did not want to for a variety of reasons, and people do it for a variety of reasons. But anyway, so I think people can definitely resonate with this one. Once again, don't forget to, in the comment section, ask any questions or comment about anything that resonates with you as we broadcast. So, how's your week, Sam?
So far, so good.
Good.
Yeah, really, really good. And I think this is a really great topic because it really can come in so many different forms.
Yeah.
Either you can be the one that, number one, feels guilty doing something,
Mm-hmm.
or someone can make you do something and make you then feel guilty, or say someone's in a lie and they're the type of personality that's very strong. They don't take accountability for the stuff, and they can also make you feel guilty for even asking,
Mm-hmm.
or you feel like the bad person, right? So there's so many different facets, especially in a relationship, of like, what, number one, what does guilt mean?
Yeah.
What does it do in a relationship? What does it do to a person's mindset? And what does it ultimately create? And there's so many different facets that can really go in different directions with this. And I had a coaching call with somebody, and they were, and this is, we kind of touched base on this a little bit on the last call, where they're having some mental health issues, and their spouse was giving them a hard time, and they finally, let them know what they were struggling with, because they just couldn't take it anymore. And they had overwhelming feelings of guilt, like almost like they knew they had to tell them,
Mm-hmm.
but there was just so much shame involved in
Yeah.
the vulnerability of letting them know where they were at, that they just couldn't do it. But there was just so much pain at that point that there was nothing left to lose. And I think really what it comes down to, especially in a relationship, is, when you have nothing else left to lose, people lose it. So how do you avoid that? How do you avoid getting to that point? How do you turn guilt into something positive? And I think that's really what it comes down to, because there's really nothing negative about emotions. The only thing that becomes negative is the actions that we take,
Mm-hmm.
and the thoughts that we create from having those emotions. There's nothing wrong with having thoughts or feelings of guilt, but the whole question is, why are you having these feelings?
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it? And how are you going to make this
Mm-hmm.
better in some form or some way?
I think you're right. I think there's two ends of the spectrum. I think there's a person who is feeling guilty and the person who makes others feel guilty. I think there's a complete difference. I think that there's a huge manipulation part on those who use the guilt towards others. I think it's definitely a manipulation tactic. However, when you feel guilt for not doing something that your heart doesn't desire, then that's something that you have to work on, where it's like self-esteem, it's, worth, that kind of stuff, because we all know, and especially business people like yourself, an entrepreneur at heart, you understand the correlation, when you exchange your time for something that your heart doesn't desire. And you understand the value of it. And when you don't understand the value of it, you have to understand why you keep putting yourself in that position as well.
That's right. And speaking on the entrepreneur note, I mean, I really heard a really good quote. There's a fine line between balance
Mm-hmm.
of work and life. And people think that you're somehow going to start a business and create work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching a Tony Robbins podcast, and he basically said there's no such thing. There's a such thing of work-life integration. So how does that play out in the forms of guilt? I can't tell you how many times myself as an entrepreneur, or people that I know that are entrepreneurs, that, they have conversation, they feel so guilty about how little time they're spending with their spouse, with their children, the time that they're spending with their families. And you can really run into a roadblock with this. And really what it comes down to, I mean, does there have to be a crossroad between how much time you want to spend with your family, your friends, and chasing your dreams?
Mm-hmm.
So I think what it comes down to is really coming down to the first step. And that is, okay, why am I having these overwhelming feelings of guilt? Where do they stem from? What are they related to? And how can I really turn this around into something positive? Maybe what you do is, what I like to do, and I've started to do more frequently, is to turn myself around with things. Is as soon as I notice I start having emotions, which there's nothing wrong. The
Mhm.
wrong part is when you start attaching negative things to it,
Mhm.
right? Is, okay, why am I having this emotion of guilt? Okay, you know what? I'm spending too much time at work. I'm not having enough time with my wife. I'm getting a lot of flack at home, and I just feel like I'm at a crossroad with this. So
Mhm.
how do I integrate both so I feel empowered, so that I'm not negotiating my wants, my desire, my needs from both spectrums? And then when you come into that mindset, that mind frame with your partner or whoever it is that you're with, it already starts off in the right foot,
Mhm.
because you're understanding from their point of view what they're needing, and you're also not willing to negotiate your desires, your wants, and the things that you want to accomplish in your life either. You're trying to integrate.
Mhm.
So when it comes to entrepreneurism, you have to learn how to integrate both work and your external life.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, when you watch the highlight reels of, these big names on YouTube like Gary Vee, Grant Cardone, all those guys, I think that they too probably struggle with that at times. And I think they would be really good leaders if they express a little bit more how they find that balance, because Gary Vee talks all the time about how he hardly sleeps. He wakes up and he's grinding all the time. And but in between there, I think the reality is, he has a family, he's human, he's got to have that moment and that time for those people as well. But I think I think it doesn't always have to be about your relationship. I think that there's people outside of your intimate relationship that also use manipulation as a tool for a variety of reasons, and a lot of the times it's just preconditioning of how they have been made to feel, in their younger selves, and they just use that tool, tactic, whatever you want to call it, um, as an enforcer in their adulthood. Because I think, truthfully, it's their way of communicating without asking for what they really want.
So what would be an example of that? Because I know for myself, as I've been on this journey, I
Mhm.
always find I can really have those aha moments once I hear examples of like real life.
Yeah.
So how does that play out in a situation in, say, your life or someone else's life?
Okay. So, for example, I've always heard like, well, you do what you want. If I've been asked to do something and then like the end comment is, well, you do what you want. It's like, well, no, you don't really want me to do what I want. You want me to do what you want, right? Because if I did what I want, then I'd be happier and you'd be less happy. So, where do you find that fine balance between people who use that guilt trip, that manipulation of not being able to ask for what they actually want and turn it around and use statements like that? I catch on to it very quickly now. And there's ways you can go about it. I mean, if you want to be that person who opens up that communication line, and you could potentially just be like, well, what I'm hearing you say is this. Am I hearing you correctly? Right. So it's kind of like feeding it back to them, what they're unable to say, so that they can hear you say what they actually mean. And hopefully next time they can actually say it a little bit better. So I always interpret it that someone taught me that little tool where it's just mirroring it back. You have to kind of like decode that covert communication, where if someone's saying, well, you do what you want, and it's like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is this. Da, 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 da. Am I hearing you correctly? So that way they have a chance to digest actually what they want from you or asking. And then you can actually have an open dialogue without, getting defensive and whatever. So I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but it works pretty well
Yeah, I know
as a
for
strategy.
sure. Absolutely, 100%. And just to add on that, I think really what it comes down to is someone's choosing to react that way is they're in their mind, there's a sense of loss. Because if there wasn't a sense of loss, then they wouldn't react that way.
Right.
Right. So the whole question is, one, you don't want to feel guilted when you're going to do that thing. And I hear this all the time
Yeah.
in relationships when, you know, someone's extroverted and likes to go out to places and their partner's very introverted or maybe has some anxieties or some trust issues, and they always guilt the person into feeling like maybe they shouldn't go or that they should feel bad when they go. And I hear it all the time. And the
Hmm.
whole question is, number one is, why, what does that person think that they're going to experience? They think they're going to experience some form of loss or hurt or whatever. So maybe have an intelligent conversation, you know, whether it's husband, wife, whatever it might be, and just say, look, you know, we need to have important conversations, because important conversations are necessary in order to feel free in a relationship.
Hmm.
No relationship should feel like, you know, you know, kind of like you're on parole. Like, it
Hmm.
should never feel that way. And if it is, well, give us a call for some coaching. But here's some fine lines and some things you can do. Rule number one: if your partner is constantly making you feel grief or guilt, you need to have a very special talk. And that talk needs to go in a couple different ways. One, the talk can go, look, you know, I'm never going to stop chasing my goals, my dreams, spending time with my friends, going to do the hobbies that I love. But you're also an important part of my life.
Hmm.
And I don't want you to feel like there's a sense of loss when I'm going to do these things. These are just loves and passions of mine,
Hmm.
and we should always support one another. How can I help you feel better about when I go to do these things? Because you also have to establish the fact that that boundary of, I will not feel guilted into doing the things that I love and that make me feel alive. That's
Hmm.
rule number one in a relationship. Never tolerate someone who makes you feel guilty when you're doing the things that light you up in a relationship.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think too, with that, um, I think there has to be, when you said the response that you were saying, it's that sense of security that people are looking for, right? And the more you feed into the insecurity portion,
Yeah.
you're going to get more of the guilt trips, right? So I think you need to understand the fine balance between it all. Like, what are you feeding? you
Yeah.
know and a lot of the times in a relationship, someone is feeding that part where there is such a lack of security and significance. And it's understanding how to find that balance too, right, where you're not feeding an anxious brain, but you're also not enabling an anxious brain, if that makes sense. Because I think that there has to be a fine line between it all. And I mean, as a woman, I'm telling you that I know that there's a need for that sense of security. And I also know that there's that need of that self, that expressive self for independence in your partner. So I think it really, really it's situational. But a lot of the times it is a lack of being able to communicate it properly. Your wants, your needs, your desires, your fears, your worries, sometimes with being judged. And I think that's a whole part of it too. People are afraid to say something out of fear of being judged for feeling a certain way. So they go around it in a manipulative way. And it comes out feeling like they're saying it out of making you feel guilty, So I think if you create a safe place where you can open that communication, be like, look, I hear you. What I'm hearing is this. Am I hearing you correctly? Where can we go to improve this part? Because obviously there's something that trauma has impacted their inability to reason, um, and decisively communicate what their wants and needs are. So yeah, there's a whole slew of reasons why people go and rely on making others feel guilty. And I think truthfully, it's the inability to be expressive.
You know what? You hit it right on the nose. And there's so many different facets, especially guilt, but you touched on one of the most important ones. And I think what it comes down to is, let's talk about a scenario where, let's say a female's in a relationship.
Mhm.
You've been in multiple relationships. You've coached people. You hear a lot about a lot of females' issues with men that they're with, and a lot of things that they guilt them into. What are some of the most common things that you hear about?
Men guilting women or women guilting men?
Yeah, men guilting their women.
Um, I think men kind of resort to making their women feel guilty for having that independence, to be quite honest. Um, but there's a fine line between it because I'm also on the conservative part with that as well, right? I think there has to be that fine, respectful balance, and there's a lot of insecurities that come with that too, though. And I think that when someone is, like you said, unable to see the need for that in the other person, then of course there's insecurities attached to it, the worry, the fear, the loss. And men or women, I think they both do it instinctively, out of safeguarding, to be quite honest. um, but I think I can speak more for women, how they treat their men. um, I think for women, I think that they like to create an ownership type scenario, where they feel like they have to hone in on their man's every move, and it becomes to a point where it's suffocating, and then it's the guilt of, you don't love me anymore, I don't mean anything to you. And it's like the only way that they can show that significance is by not doing what they don't want them to do. So, what part do you feed and what part don't you feed? Right. So, I think you can probably speak to that in the mental health part because, that anxious brain that you always talk of shows up there. And I know that a lot of women do this for sure.
Well, of course. I mean, let's face it. Here's the reality. Women's brains are designed to be gathering brains. Use both sides of brains at the same time. Men are hunters by nature, and we use one part of our brain at a time. So we're completely different biologically. Our chemistry is different, right? And our wants and desires and needs are different. But at the end of the day, we're all just seeking love, connection,
Of
and
course.
and a way to find something that's going to be stable
Hmm.
and safe, right? So, what are some of the parameters around this? I think some key things is to make your woman feel like she's not replaceable.
Hmm.
That's how you calm the anxious mind, because women's brain are naturally just going to do that. There
Yeah.
was a time back in the day we lived in caves. They're always worried about whether we're going to come back or not, right?
Hmm.
So, but in today's day and age, it's completely different. It's are we going to come back from the bar or back from the trip and not do anything that maybe we shouldn't have done?
Hmm.
But there's really a fine line of really making sure, especially from a female perspective, to make sure your husband knows or your boyfriend knows what it is you're really after.
Hmm.
And you kind of sometimes have to get out of your way, because I can't tell you countless amounts of times I've seen people make people feel guilty, and not only does it cause problems in the relationship, but it ends the relationship. Even if the relationship isn't over, it's over,
Hmm.
because they are already looking for the next best thing, right?
Yeah.
So the whole question is, I think essentially we're all going to have feelings of guilt in a
Hmm.
relationship. The question is, how are you going to turn that into a positive? How are you going to take decisive actions to do things that are going to create a different blueprint than your anxious mind, which is one that's looking for everything that's wrong all the time, the things you need to fear, and start looking for ways to make things right?
Yeah.
And you owe it to yourself,
Hmm.
you owe it to the person you're with, because I always say, this week we just had the headline with Kobe Bryant, 41 years old with his 13-year-old daughter. I lost my best friend at the age of 37. Your time is limited, people.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, you have a responsibility to yourself and to the person you're with to try to make as many moments filled with love, happiness, joy, growth, adventure, desire, and all that fun stuff as
Yeah.
possible. And when you're getting into the side of guilt, which is going to create a lot of turmoil, you're going to waste a lot of time.
Hmm. Yeah. I just want to make sure that you're on the comment feed, Sam.
Okay.
So at the top right, it should say comments. If
I
you
see
click on,
live comments. We've got one.
okay. Okay. So you are on comments instead of private chat, right?
Oh, yeah, private. Yeah, live comments. Yep.
Okay. Just
I
making
just
sure.
see Dom's made a comment.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
Yeah. Okay. No, I agree. And it's funny because I used to have this fixed mindset where my brain, of course, as a woman, it would run in a million directions. But I've come to this one conclusion. And I hope that this can resonate with any woman or man that's, living in an anxious or um, fearful mind. One thing you have to remind yourself is you are never in control of the person you either are in love with, the person who you claim to be in a relationship with, or even a loved one. You are never in control of their behavior. And no matter how hard you try to be, you won't ever be. The only person that you are in control of is yourself, your behaviors, your attitude, your direction. But I will tell you this, as long as you are being as true to whatever is serving you at the moment, it's going to serve you the same way. Um, but you don't have to fear what is to come, because the more you can continue to fear what is to come, you forget what is meant for you. And I truthfully believe that the more you live in the moment, and something might happen a year, a week, or a day that is unpredictable, but just know that you are living your best self to your fullest potential, because there's, no matter what you try to control, it's never going to turn out the way that you want. And you will always find disappointment in the moments that you should be finding love and joy.
I agree.
So I think that if you start living with the mindset that as long as you are being true and being consistent and being what you know to be morally right for you and for your relationship, that's all that matters. Because the more you resemble what you want in a relationship, it's going to reflect back. It is a mirror effect. Um, and I'm not saying that you will never come through a circumstance that, might teach you another big lesson, but that's a lesson learned while still continuing to be who you were designed to be. Because there's nothing more draining, and I know this personally, there's nothing more draining than trying to control something that is completely out of your control. So there's a part of you that does need to surrender and just be who you are authentically made to be.
No, I agree.
So,
And I know there's a recap, and I mean, in order to experience a fulfilling relationship,
yeah.
it's going to be solely dependent on how much uncertainty you're
Yeah.
willing to get comfortable with.
This is
And
very true.
you will not grow if you're chasing
Mhm.
safety and always fleeing for the easiest way.
Mhm.
You will experience the least amount of growth,
Yeah.
the least amount of happiness possible. And I kind of wanted to touch base on a different angle of this. I mean, what about when people use guilt as a weapon?
Mm.
And and what I mean by that is I actually coach someone, and they told me that they've been with a partner for numerous years, and when it came down to times where they actually did things wrong, they never took any accountability. They
Mm.
always deflected. They
Yeah.
always made them seem like they're crazy. They had their perceptions wrong, and they ended up feeling guilty for even asking afterwards,
Mhm.
and nothing ever got resolved.
Mhm.
So in that context, what do you do when you might feel powerless? And maybe at that point, really, I think if you're tolerated, that has a lot to do with like your self-esteem,
Of course.
your belief systems, the things
Yeah.
you value about yourself and your life. Because I mean, you know, if you're a self-actualizing person, you're not really going to tolerate those sorts of behaviors.
Mhm.
And I think really what it comes down to, once you set that standard and that fine line, it kind of breaks that pattern,
Mhm.
either with that person or something you'll never tolerate in the future
Mhm.
again. Right. So
Yeah. But I think too, in moments like that, there's so many times where it's like I for myself saw myself, and I said, okay, I can see how someone would be frustrated with the way I was communicating, because the way at certain points in my life I was communicating with the wrong tools. I was communicating with what all I knew without looking outside the box. So I think before you go to the point of not tolerating, I think you have to exhaust some of the tools that you're willing to use. And that is with different types of communication. So, for example, when I was telling you about, someone saying, oh, well, you choose, you decide for you, or you do what's best for you. Okay, I could have been very defensive, or I could have tried to use a different tool to help them understand what they're actually trying to say and feel.
Mm,
So for me, interpreting it as, well, I don't have to listen to you because I'm an adult, but I kind of want to respect how you feel in this moment. I needed to understand. So I did interpret it and I, used the different language of, so what I'm hearing you say is, ba, 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 ba. Am I hearing you correctly? And it just opens up a dialogue for them to be expressive. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to work for everybody.
yeah.
And I'm not going to say that there are people that have a very hard time looking in the mirror at themselves. Um, because there are very self-absorbed people and narcissism is a real thing. But it's understanding when to try a different tool and when to exhaust the old ones. Because it is like a rat race. You can continue to go in the wheel and turn a million times and get the same results, or you can try different things. I mean, you have helped me, you've coached me plenty of times, and I've used different tools and I have seen success. So I think that before people throw in the towel, you have to be able to say, you know what, I've tried A, B, C, and D, and I'm still getting the same results. So it may not be you. That's the thing. I can honestly say that at some points it was me, but I knew that I had to change. And some people just need to see past their own nose, and when that really needs to set in for themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. And guilt is also a form of manipulation
Oh,
to meet
100%.
to meet a need.
Of
And the whole
course.
question is now, I mean, if there's one tidbit I want to leave people, because I think everybody has tried to make someone feel guilty at some form of their relationship. And the whole question is, how do you stop using it as a weapon and something that empowers you? And I think really what you have to do is reinterpret what it means.
Hmm.
You know, because if you're having the feelings of trying to make someone feel guilty, or someone's trying to make you feel guilty, what's the underlying message? Some of these are experiencing some sort of loss, or they're clearly not interpreting what is it exactly that's going on. So be very, like, take a deep breath and just allow yourself to be vulnerable. Just be honest.
Hmm.
Don't use, attacking words or shaming tactics or ways to put someone down if, they want to do something in the relationship that maybe you're not comfortable with, something that maybe you're not of an interest. Go about it in a different way.
Yeah.
Really, really just don't use it as a weapon. Use it something that will fuel you to make the relationship that much better. And not only that, if that person now understand that you're no longer making them feel guilty and you support them, even though you might not be comfortable with, you will gain so much more respect from them. But
Hmm.
over time, you will gain more respect for yourself once you understand that just like you said, you don't control the other person.
Hmm.
Your job is to make them great.
Hmm.
Your job is to make them feel alive. Your
Hmm.
job is to make them want to pursue everything that lights them up in life, the reason why they're here. And as soon as you start using guilt tactics, that's a reflection of something that's going on in you,
Of course.
right? So,
And it's so true. I mean, you know, the whole notion of women feeling insecure about loss or um, you know, their partner doing something behind their backs. Men feel the exact same way. And it comes through almost in the exact same mannerisms. And I think it's just reading between the lines of their fear, their worry, their insecurity. And I think truthfully, there's a point where you have to sit back and be like, have I fed this anxious brain? Like, is there something that I've done to contribute to this anxious brain? Because there will always be two ends of the spectrum. There will.
oh, well, Gina's frozen, so I'm not exactly sure where she was continuing with that, but I'm sure she'll be back in a second. And I think there's also another real negative play on guilt. And I'm sure there's numerous times where you who is watching, you've been in a situation where someone has guilted you into something that you've done or wanted to do, or some experience from the past, and yet they go and do the same thing, thinking that it's okay, but yet it's a problem for you if you go and do it, right? So the whole question is, what do you do if in your relationship like that? So here's what I recommend. One, if it's not something that bothers you, then maybe what you do is, you let it go. But if it is something that bothers you, you really have a good talk and say, look, you're really bringing this up a lot of times, but you yourself are doing this well. This is kind of a double standard. So what are some things that we can do about this that, you could either stop writing me on, or that we can solve this? Because number one, I don't appreciate it. The fact that, you're really hard on me about this. I mean, and really what it comes down to is I'd love to have your thoughts. I mean, maybe you could leave a comment. Let us know some of your struggles you've had with guilt that maybe you've made the other person feel. Or maybe there's also some things that the partner with or the person you're with has also made you feel as well. You're back, Gene.
I'm back. I don't know what happened. I got kicked off.
Do you remember what you were talking about? I kind of played off on a different role here, and
Yeah.
how I don't know. Did you get anything that I said?
No, I didn't hear what you
Okay,
said.
so I brought up a different angle where, say you're in a relationship and someone always has an issue with something that you're doing,
Mhm,
something particular, but yet they'll go and do the exact same thing thinking it's okay.
mhm.
So, and you see that happen so many times where there's that double standard. I call it, the double standard of guilt, like where, they'll have a problem with something you're doing, but yet they'll go and do it thinking it's perfectly fine, where that can be conflicting in a way too, right? So,
Of course.
you know, how do you approach that? What would be some positive way? I gave a couple of my opinions, but what would be some ways that you would approach that situation?
With the double standard?
Yeah.
It's funny because someone told me the other day, they're like, well, and this is a professional. They're like, you know what? Sometimes there are double standards. And I thought about it and I'm like, okay, quite possibly. Like, I mean, if you're raising a son and a daughter, you might do things a little bit differently
Yep.
for each or the other, right? So I think it depends on the situation. I think it's very situational. Um, but once again, I think that's built on insecurities, the fear of the loss, the fear of the worry of what if, or not being good enough, or, searching for something else. There's always that fear. However, I think you're right on, the way you communicate about it. You can make very light of the subject, almost kind of supporting what they're doing, but, acknowledging that it's pretty much the same thing that they're complaining about. But there comes a fine line between control, that need for control and possessiveness. You have to understand the difference. Because I do believe that sometimes there is a double standard for things, and it's very situational, very situational. But you have to understand the need for needing to control and the possessiveness, because that can be very toxic, and the need for making someone understand, well, maybe this isn't safe for you if it's out of love or concern. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. 100%.
Yeah. So, but I just kind of want to finish what I was saying before when I had my hands like this. um, I think that when you have a partner who, you need to understand what side of the fence you're on. Are you on the side that's feeding the anxiety intentionally, right? Or are you on the other side where you are just an anxious person? Because there's a difference. Because if someone is feeding the anxiety, that's not healthy. Um, and that person is doing it intentionally for manipulation purposes. And on the other end, if you just naturally have an anxious mind and you are conjuring up all these thoughts, that's something that you intrinsically need to work on. And it's the need not to be in control, the need to be present, not live in the past or the future. And that's where, truthfully, it starts. There's a great book called The Power of Now. I don't know if you've ever read it.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's a huge game changer. It definitely opened up my eyes to, they say that if you're an anxious person, you're living in the future, and if you're a depressed person, you are living in the past, right? So, which way do you want to live? There's really only three options, and I would choose the middle one.
No, I agree. And I think if you're an anxious person going into a relationship thinking that you're going to seek a lot of control to keep it safe, you're going to have a whirlwind of pain.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree.
it's going to be painful whether you grow or it's going to be painful whether you stay where you are, but you will endure more pain
Mhm.
trying to seek comfort and no growth. And
Mhm.
in order to use guilt as a form of weapon to keep things safe, that's a recipe for failure.
And I've always said, and even in my relationship too, I've come to this point where I always say, I know what's right for me, and I would never make whatever is right for me something that you need to have right for you, because you're opening up the opportunity to understand what your needs are and what matter the most, and if they match your partner's needs, because they could be very different. And in order for you to understand that, you have to have this conversation. But the thing is, once you are able to have this conversation, you can see if this is something that is going to work or it's not, because you can't force whatever matters to you onto somebody else for them to have that as a precedent for them. So you have to understand that. You have to understand and have those conversations. We always say that they're the right talks, because once you find out what matters to you doesn't matter to your partner, you're going to try and force what matters to you onto your partner. And that's when the guilt starts setting in. And you have to be okay with releasing people if it's not that way, if they desire something different than and you have to come to terms with that. Because you can never force somebody to be or fit into a box that was created by you. Just will never work.
No, I agree 100%. I think really what it comes down to is, if you're watching this and you're having overwhelming feelings of guilt frequently,
Mm-hmm.
you either got to go seek some counseling with your partner or find a life coach, find somebody that can help you, because you're going to look back in your life. And when you realize how much wasted time you had because you're literally struggling with your own limitations.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you finally realize that you then try to set those limitations on a person that decided to spend their life with you,
Yeah.
regret weighs tons. This is a quote by Jim Rohn. So don't live in regret. Find a way to grow, push through as much as you possibly can, to get away from these guilty feelings and just trying to find a way to get comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
being and choosing to do something different,
Yeah. I agree.
because, whether this was something learned or an experience that you had that caused you to flee to these feelings of guilt, there's the best time to change is always now,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're in a relationship, then you took that oath, you decided to spend that time, your time, with the person that you're with, and you have a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that responsibility is to make that person shine. And the only way that you can do that is if you shine yourself.
110%.
Right. So I have nothing else to share on this unless you have something you want to say.
No, I don't. I think people need to understand if they are being guilted into something, or if they are making people feeling guilted into something, and understand why it's happening and why people accept the behavior or initiate it, because there's two separate, realms of the whole concept, and neither are good. And it all depends on response and communication, honestly.
Well, if you take responsibility and break it down,
Hmm.
you have response and you also have that ability.
Yeah.
So choose wisely. If you find that you're responding too quickly, break down that word, the response, and you have the ability to control your response.
Hmm.
But it's just sometimes we get so caught up in the moment to meet our needs that we don't think we have that capability.
Hmm.
So just really break it down, slow down, realize why you chose to be with this person in the first place. And as you progress, whether if you're watching this and you're just starting out, you're getting into the dating game, you're thinking about married, you're engaged, you've been together for 10, 20 years, wherever you're at, really always just take the time to find a way to be a better you.
Hmm.
And the moment you do that, everything around you automatically shines. And the person you're with will shine. They will automatically become better because perception is everything.
Hmm. I agree. So, on that note, this is another episode of our live chat with the relationship series,
3.
always discussing matters of the heart and mind. All right, Sam, I'll see you later.
All right. If you're going to dream, dream big.